I didn't know my life was about to split into a before and an after because my 7-year-old daughter threw up at school. Not because she was seriously ill, not because of some tragic accident, but because a grown woman decided that a working mother didn't deserve to be treated like a real parent. My name is Lila Morgan. I'm 32 years old. I work in a manufacturing facility where one distracted second can cost you a finger. Phones aren't just discouraged, they're forbidden. Locked away from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., no exceptions. And my husband, Jaden, has always been our daughter Naomi's primary emergency contact for school. It had worked for 3 years. Seamless, logical, safe. Until one Wednesday afternoon, when I opened my locker after a 12-hour shift and saw 16 missed calls from the elementary school. 16. My hands started shaking before my brain caught up. 16 calls in 4 hours meant something catastrophic. My heart was already racing through worst-case scenarios. A playground fall, a car accident in the parking lot, something unthinkable. When I called back, it wasn't panic on the other end. It was judgment. Madison, the new front office secretary, informed me in a cold, clipped tone that Naomi had thrown up around 1 p.m. She'd been trying to reach me for hours. And since I hadn't answered, she had no choice but to contact CPS. CPS. My stomach dropped into my knees. Except here's the part that didn't make sense. My husband was home. His name was listed first on the emergency contact form. She had skipped him, on purpose. Because as she calmly explained, a child who's sick needs her mother. That was the moment something inside me shifted. This wasn't about a stomach bug. It wasn't about safety. It was about control, about judgment, about someone deciding I was a bad mother because I worked in a factory instead of sitting in a PTA meeting at 10 a.m. By the time this was over, she would lose her job. But that night, sitting in my car, shaking, I had no idea how far it would go, or how many other parents had been silently dealing with the same thing. And that was only the first time I realized how easily someone could try to rewrite your identity as a mother. The second time, that one broke my family apart. Before Madison ever said the word CPS, like it was a punishment, my life was simple in the way people don't appreciate until something shakes it. Not easy, not glamorous, but steady. I was 32, married, 1 child, 1 mortgage, 1 rhythm that kept us afloat. Jaden and I weren't the kind of couple people write dramatic love stories about. We didn't meet in a cafe with rain on the windows. We met the way real adults meet when they're building a life, through exhaustion, through timing, through a moment that felt small until it didn't. I was 26, working my first real job out of community college, standing in line at a DMV on my lunch break. The kind of line that smelled like old paper and impatience. I had a folder of documents tucked under my arm, and I kept checking the time because my supervisor had already warned me about being late again. Jaden was behind me. I didn't know that at first. I just heard a quiet voice say, "You look like you're about to sprint out of here." I turned, half annoyed, and saw him. Tall, tired eyes, work boots, holding a coffee like it was life support. I might, I admitted, because I didn't have the energy to pretend. He smiled like he understood. Not flirtatious, not cocky, just human. "Go ahead of me," he said, nodding at my folder. "You've got more paperwork. I'm just renewing." I blinked. "No, I can't." "You can," he said, and stepped back without making it a big deal. That was the first thing I noticed about him. He did decent things without demanding credit for them. We talked for the rest of the line. About jobs, about how adulthood felt like constantly running late to something, about the kind of tired that lives behind your eyes. He worked in a distribution center even then, long shifts, physical work. I worked in admin at a small company, trying to claw my way into something better. When my number was called, I looked back like I expected him to be gone. He wasn't. He lifted his coffee slightly like a goodbye, like that moment didn't need to be turned into a performance. But later that night, I got a friend request from him. And I remember staring at the screen thinking, of course he found me. Of course he did it quietly. We dated slow, not because we weren't interested, because we were careful. I'd had a messy relationship before him, the kind that teaches you not to confuse intensity with love. Jaden had his own history too. A short marriage in his early 20s that ended when he realized they wanted completely different lives. He didn't talk about it much, but I could tell it left a bruise in him. Not a bitterness, just a caution. When I got pregnant with Naomi, it wasn't a surprise exactly, but it still felt like the universe had placed something fragile in our hands and dared us to be responsible. Jaden held my face the day we saw the positive test and said, "Okay, we do this right." And he meant it. He became the kind of father who didn't need applause. He learned how to do a perfect ponytail. He remembered what brand of crackers Naomi liked. He woke up without complaint for midnight fevers and early morning cartoon requests. When Naomi was born, I was the one who cried first. I cried because she was tiny and loud and perfect. Jaden cried later, quietly, when he thought I wasn't watching, his hand on her back, his shoulders shaking like he'd been holding in fear his whole life. We arranged our schedules around her like a puzzle we were proud to solve. I worked days at the plant, not because I dreamed of manufacturing, but because it was stable money and benefits, and the kind of job where you could actually build a life if you stayed disciplined. Jaden worked overnights at the distribution center. It wasn't ideal. It meant we kissed hello and goodbye in the doorway more than we ate dinner together. But it also meant Naomi always had a parent. Always. If the school needed someone, Jaden was home during the day, awake enough to handle pickup, appointments, emergencies. I was unreachable on the floor. That wasn't a choice. That was policy, safety, reality. When Naomi started kindergarten, we didn't assume the school would figure it out. We sat down like responsible adults. We met the front office staff. We explained my job. We explained the no phone policy. We showed them the emergency contact form. Jaden, cell. My mother-in-law, cell and home. Me, cell with a note. Unreachable 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. weekdays. Contact Jaden first. The secretary back then had nodded along like it was common sense. Perfect, she'd said. We have plenty of working parents. We'll call Dad first. For 3 years, it worked. Naomi got a scraped knee once. Jaden got called. Naomi had a rash the nurse wanted checked. Jaden got called. There was a half-day schedule change. Jaden got called. I didn't even think about it anymore. I didn't think I needed to. Then last year, that secretary retired, and the new one arrived, Madison. I met her exactly once at back-to-school night. I remember the moment more clearly now, like my brain rewound and highlighted the part I ignored. The cafeteria was crowded, parents balancing paperwork, kids running around, teachers trying to keep smiles glued to their faces. Jaden had Naomi on his shoulders because she'd been clinging to him like a koala, and I was carrying the folder with all the updated forms. Madison was behind the front desk with her arms crossed. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't welcoming. She was staring at us, at Jaden holding our daughter, at me holding the paperwork, like we were doing something wrong, like we were unfamiliar in a way that bothered her. At the time, I told myself I was imagining it. People stare for all kinds of reasons. Maybe she was tired, maybe she had a headache, maybe she was just one of those office people who looked stern by default. But our town is traditional. That's the polite way to say it. Most families have a stay-at-home parent, usually the mom. The PTA meetings are at 10 a.m. on weekdays. The school events are built for women who can show up with coffee and time. Jaden went to one PTA meeting last October because I couldn't. He came home and said, it was like walking into a room where everyone decided I was an intruder. He laughed when he said it, but there was something brittle under it. Nobody talked to me, he'd admitted. 23 moms, one dad. They looked at me like I was lost. I hugged him, told him he didn't need their approval, that Naomi was what mattered. And I believed it. What I didn't realize was that Madison wasn't just judging. She was deciding what kind of mother I was, deciding what kind of father Jaden was, deciding what kind of family we were allowed to be. So when Wednesday happened, when Naomi got sick, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the first time Madison acted on the story she'd already written about me. And once she said, a child needs her mother, I knew with a clarity that made me cold inside. She didn't just want Naomi picked up. She wanted me punished. Looking back now, the conflict didn't explode out of nowhere. It simmered. It lingered in glances and small remarks I told myself not to overanalyze. The first subtle sign happened a few weeks after that back-to-school night. Naomi had forgotten her lunch one Tuesday. It wasn't dramatic. Jaden had been up most of the night because a truck shipment was delayed at work, and in the morning rush, the lunchbox stayed on the counter. The school called, not Jaden. Me. I only knew because when I checked my phone during my 2 p.m. break, there was a voicemail from Madison. Her tone was clipped. Mrs. Morgan, Naomi didn't have a lunch today. It's important that mothers double-check these things in the morning. Mothers, not parents. Not families. Mothers. I stared at the voicemail, replayed it twice, then called Jaden. They didn't call you? I asked. No, he said. I was literally awake. I could have brought it in. He sounded confused more than angry. I'll stop by and drop something off anyway, he said. He went. And when he got home later, he told me Madison had looked irritated that he showed up instead of me. She asked where you were, he said. And you told her, I asked? That you were at work, like she already knew. We brushed it off. It was lunch. It wasn't CPS. It wasn't serious. But something about the way she'd emphasized the word mother lingered in my chest like a splinter. Then there was the field trip form. Naomi had a permission slip for a museum trip. The form came home in her backpack. But 2 days later, I received another voicemail from Madison reminding me that Mom hasn't returned the form. Jaden had already emailed it. He'd scanned it and sent it from his phone because that was easier than relying on Naomi remembering to put it back in her folder. When Jaden called the office to clarify, Madison told him she preferred hard copies signed by the mother. Preferred. Like it was a personal preference, not policy. Jaden didn't argue. He printed another copy, signed it, and dropped it off in person. He told me later that she looked almost disappointed when he handed it to her. It sounds ridiculous now, these tiny things. Lunch, a form, a voicemail. But patterns don't start with explosions. They start with discomfort. Then came the PTA meeting in October. Jaden had volunteered to attend because I had mandatory overtime that day. He dressed neatly. Jeans, clean button-down, hair combed back, like he was showing up for a job interview. He wanted to be taken seriously. He sat in a room full of mothers discussing fundraising ideas and teacher appreciation gifts. He said the room felt tight when he walked in. Like I was breaking some unspoken rule, he told me later. Madison wasn't running the meeting, but she was in the back of the room handling paperwork. At one point, when Jaden raised his hand to ask about the book fair budget, Madison leaned toward another woman and whispered something. Both of them glanced at him. He didn't know what was said, but he felt it. After the meeting, Madison approached him near the exit. She smiled, but it wasn't warm. It's nice that you're helping out, she said, but we usually coordinate with the mothers about these things. He blinked. My wife works during the day. Oh, she said, like that explained something tragic. Well, hopefully she can make more time next semester. More time. As if we were choosing inconvenience over involvement. As if our schedule wasn't built around keeping a roof over Naomi's head. Jaden didn't tell me about that conversation until months later, after the CPS scare, because he didn't want to upset me. I thought I could just handle it, he admitted. I didn't want you feeling like you had to defend your job. But that was the problem. He shouldn't have had to handle anything. Our arrangement wasn't radical. It was practical. He worked nights, I worked days, we covered our child between us. Yet Madison seemed to operate on a different blueprint. One where a sick child automatically meant dialing the mother. One where a father was a backup, not a primary caregiver. One where my job wasn't an equal contribution. It was a flaw. The week before Naomi got sick, there was another small moment. I had taken a personal day to attend a school assembly Naomi was performing in. I was sitting near the back of the auditorium because I'd arrived late. I still smelled faintly like the factory floor, metal and oil, no matter how hard I scrubbed. Madison was near the entrance, checking attendance. When she saw me, she paused. You're Naomi's mother, right? She asked. Yes. She gave a tight nod. I didn't realize you were able to attend daytime events. I smiled politely. I took the day off. She looked at my clothes. Simple jeans, a plain sweater. That's good, she said. Children need to see their mothers show up. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Like attendance was proof of worth. Like my absence on weekdays meant deficiency. That comment followed me home that night. I stood at the sink, washing dishes, and replayed it in my head. Children need to see their mothers show up. What did she think I was doing every day? Vacationing. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. I packed lunches. I folded laundry at midnight. I saved for Naomi's college fund. I kissed her forehead before every shift. But to Madison, that wasn't visible. And what isn't visible is easy to dismiss. So when Wednesday arrived, when Naomi threw up at 1 p.m., Madison didn't just make a logistical mistake. She followed the pattern she had been building for months. She called me first. Then again, and again, and again. 16 times. While my husband, fully capable, fully available, fully listed as the primary contact, sat at home waiting for a phone call that never came. When I replay that afternoon in my mind, the timeline feels heavy. 1 p.m., Naomi gets sick. 1:30 p.m., Madison pulls the guidance counselor aside. Between 1 and 2, 18 p.m., 16 calls to my unreachable phone. 2:18 p.m., one single call to Jaden. 1. More than an hour later, that hour mattered. Naomi sat in that office, pale and shaky, watched by a stranger holding a notebook. Because Madison decided it made more sense to call the mother first. Not because of policy. Not because of emergency protocol. Because of belief. And beliefs, when left unchecked, become actions. By the time I realized this wasn't an accident, it was already too late. The damage had been done. The accusation had been planted, and the word CPS had been used like a weapon. When I think about that phone call now, I don't remember sitting down. I remember standing in the parking lot outside the plant, the sky already turning that dusty gray blue of early evening, my back throbbing from 12 hours on concrete. I remember unlocking my locker. I remember the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. And then I remember the number. 16 missed calls, all from the elementary school. My fingers went cold. I didn't even grab my bag. I just hit call back. It rang twice. Madison answered. Her voice wasn't frantic. It wasn't apologetic. It was sharp. Mrs. Morgan, she said, as if I had inconvenienced her by returning the call. Yes, I said, my breath already uneven. Is Naomi okay? She threw up in class at 1 p.m., Madison replied. We've been trying to reach you for hours. My brain snagged on that. Trying to reach me. I work in a no-phone facility, I said quickly. My husband is listed first. Is she with him now? There was a pause, just long enough to feel intentional. We tried to reach the mother first, Madison said. A sick child needs her mother. My hand tightened around the phone. You called me 16 times, I said. Did you call Jaden? Another pause. We called him after it became clear you weren't responding. After how long? My voice was shaking now. Is she still at school? She was picked up at 2:30, Madison said. But given the lack of parental response, I had no choice but to contact CPS. The world tilted. What? My heart slammed so hard I thought I might actually pass out. I contacted Child Protective Services because Naomi was left without a parent for over an hour while ill. She wasn't left without a parent, I snapped, the words tearing out of me. Her father was home. We couldn't reach you, she repeated, ignoring what I said. And mothers should be reachable during school hours. Mothers? I echoed. Yes, she said. It's concerning when a mother prioritizes work over her child's health. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I am not prioritizing work, I said, trying to steady my voice. I am following a safety policy so I don't lose my hand on an assembly line, and her father is her primary contact. You had his number. I did what I believed was appropriate, she said flatly. And CPS? I pressed. You actually called CPS? Yes, she said. I documented the situation. Documented. The word echoed like a verdict. I imagined strangers knocking on my door. A file with my name on it. Naomi's name attached to the word neglect. All because my phone was in a locker. I need details, I said. Case number. Who did you speak to? There are parents waiting at the desk, Madison replied. If you have further concerns, you can contact the district. And then she hung up. She hung up on me. I stood there in the parking lot with the phone still pressed to my ear long after the line went dead. A coworker walked past and asked if I was okay. I couldn't answer. I got into my car and sat there for 10 full minutes before I could start the engine. My mind kept replaying her words. A mother should be reachable. I contacted CPS. My entire body felt like it had been accused of something I didn't understand. I called Jaden on the drive home. He answered on the second ring. Hey, he said, I was about to call you. Is Naomi okay? I asked. She's better, he said quickly. It was just a stomach bug, I think. She threw up twice. I've got her on the couch. I exhaled shakily. Why didn't you call me earlier? I asked. He hesitated. The school didn't call me until after 2. What? They said they were trying you first. They called me 16 times, I said, and told me they contacted CPS. There was silence on the line. They what? I explained the conversation, my voice breaking halfway through. When I finished, Jaden was quiet in a way that scared me more than yelling would have. When I got there, he said slowly, Naomi was sitting in the office with some woman I didn't recognize. Not the nurse, not a teacher, just watching her. Watching? I whispered. She had a visitor badge, a notebook. She didn't say a word to me. When I walked in, she looked startled and left. My stomach clenched. Madison hadn't just called CPS. She'd made it look like she had, like Naomi was under observation. When I got home at 7 p.m., Naomi was curled on the couch under her blanket. Her cheeks were pale, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. Mom, she said softly. I knelt in front of her. How's my girl? My tummy's better, she said. Then she hesitated. Why was that lady staring at me? I felt my chest tighten. What lady? The one in the office, she said. After I threw up, they made me sit in the chairs, and she just sat next to me and looked at me for a long time. Did she say anything? I asked gently. Naomi shook her head. She just watched. It made me feel weird. I looked up at Jaden. His jaw was tight. After Naomi went to bed, we sat at the kitchen table with our laptops open. We pulled up the emergency contact form. There it was, clear as day. Jaden. Primary. Mother-in-law. Lila. Unreachable during work hours. We checked my phone records. 16 calls between 1:07 p.m. and 2:42 p.m. We checked Jaden's. 1 call. 2:18 p.m. 1. Madison hadn't just delayed calling him. She had chosen not to. And the CPS claim? If CPS had actually been called, they wouldn't have sent someone within minutes for a stomach bug. Something didn't add up. My hands were shaking again, but this time not from fear. From anger. She lied, I said quietly. Jaden nodded once. She tried to scare you. That realization hit harder than the word CPS itself. She wanted me to panic. She wanted me to feel guilty. She wanted me to believe my job made me a bad mother. That was the moment everything changed. This wasn't about misunderstanding. This was about judgment turned into action. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just afraid for my daughter. I was furious. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Naomi sitting in that plastic office chair, feet dangling, pale and scared, while a stranger stared at her like she was evidence. And underneath that image was Madison's voice. A mother should be reachable. The accusation burrowed into places I didn't even know were vulnerable. At 3:12 a.m., I was still staring at the ceiling. What if she really did call CPS? I whispered into the dark. Jaden rolled onto his side and looked at me. Lila, he said gently, if she had, someone would have contacted us properly. There'd be documentation. You know how this works. I did. But fear doesn't care about logic. What if they flagged her file? I said. What if there's a note somewhere that says neglect? He reached across the bed and took my hand. You are not neglectful, he said firmly. You work 12-hour shifts so we can pay our mortgage. That's not neglect. I wasn't there, I said, my throat tightening. She was sick, and I wasn't there. And I was, he replied. The simplicity of that stopped me. He was there. He was listed first. He had picked her up, carried her to the car, cleaned her up, made her crackers and water, sat with her until she fell asleep. Why did Madison's judgment make me forget that? That's what bias does. It rearranges reality until you doubt your own role in it. The next morning, I called in and took a personal day. I needed clarity, not adrenaline. First, I called the district office and asked, calmly, deliberately, whether there was any open CPS report associated with Naomi's name. There wasn't. The woman on the phone sounded confused. We don't see anything, she said. If CPS had been contacted formally, you would have been notified. My stomach dropped again, but this time not from fear, from confirmation. Madison had lied. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and began documenting everything. The timeline. The call logs, screenshots of the emergency contact form, the note about my work hours. I even photographed the employee handbook page about the no phone policy. If she wanted to accuse me of being unreachable, I would show exactly why. Jaden made coffee and sat across from me. We need to do this the right way, he said. No yelling, no showing up emotional. I know, I said. But inside, I wanted to march into that office and demand an apology loud enough for the whole building to hear. Instead, I drafted an email to the principal. I kept it factual, no dramatic language, no accusations, just dates, times, and discrepancies. On Wednesday at approximately 1 p.m., my daughter Naomi became ill. I explained that 16 calls were made to my phone between 1:07 p.m. and 2:42 p.m. I explained that my husband, the primary contact, received 1 call at 2:18 p.m. I explained that I was told CPS had been contacted, and I asked directly, was CPS contacted? Who was the unidentified woman sitting with my daughter? Why was the emergency contact protocol not followed? Before sending it, I read it out loud to Jaden. Is this too much? I asked. It's exactly enough, he said. I added the superintendent and quietly CC'd a family law office my cousin had used before. Not because I wanted to sue, because I wanted them to know we were serious. I hit send at 4:47 p.m. The silence afterward felt heavy. Part of me expected an immediate defensive reply. Instead, the principal was out of office due to a family emergency. Of course he was. I paced the house that evening. I kept thinking about how easily Madison had said the word neglect. Like it was obvious. Like my job made it obvious. I thought about all the invisible things I did. The grocery budgeting, the early morning laundry, the school supplies bought months in advance, the overtime shifts so Naomi could take dance class. And one woman at a desk had reduced all of it to, you didn't answer your phone. Jaden found me in the kitchen, staring at nothing. You're spiraling, he said gently. I'm not spiraling, I replied automatically. He stepped closer. Yes, you are. My shoulders sagged. What if this isn't the first time she's done something like this? I asked quietly. What if other parents just stayed quiet? He considered that. Then maybe we're the ones who don't. That sentence settled something inside me. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about ego. It was about safety. not just Naomi's. If Madison felt comfortable skipping a listed primary contact because she preferred a mother, that wasn't a personal disagreement. That was a pattern. The next morning, I got an email from the superintendent. He wanted more information. He wanted documentation. He wanted to understand the full scope of the situation. I sent everything. Call logs, screenshots, the employee handbook, the confirmation email from 3 years ago when we'd first set up Naomi's contacts. I didn't embellish. I didn't attack. I let the evidence speak. And for the first time since Wednesday, I felt a small shift in power because facts don't bend to bias. Madison had opinions. I had records. By Friday afternoon, the anger had cooled into something steadier. Resolve. Naomi was back to her cheerful self, eating cereal at the counter and talking about an art project. She didn't remember the timeline. She didn't understand the implications. But she did ask casually, "Is the staring lady coming back?" I knelt in front of her again. "No," I said softly. "And if anyone ever makes you uncomfortable at school, you tell us. Always." She nodded. That night, I realized something else. Madison had expected me to feel ashamed, to apologize, to rearrange my life. Instead, I was documenting. Instead, I was escalating, calmly, strategically. And somewhere in that shift, my fear transformed into clarity. I hadn't failed as a mother. I had been tested, and I wasn't backing down. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 9 a.m. The email from the principal came Monday afternoon, measured, apologetic in tone, very different from what I had expected. "I would like to meet with you and your husband to discuss the incident and ensure Naomi's continued safety and your confidence in our procedures." Confidence. It was an interesting word. Jaden took the morning off. We dropped Naomi at school like usual, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, unaware that the adults in her life were about to dissect the system that was supposed to protect her. When we walked into the front office, Madison wasn't there. That was the first thing I noticed. A substitute secretary sat at the desk, offering a polite smile. No crossed arms, no assessing stare. The principal greeted us personally and ushered us into his office. He closed the door gently. "I've reviewed all of your documentation," he began, "and I've pulled our internal records from that day." His tone wasn't defensive, it was heavy. "The woman who sat with Naomi," he continued, "is Stella. She's a guidance counselor who works part-time across 3 schools. She was asked to sit with Naomi around 1:30 p.m. "Why?" I asked. The principal exhaled slowly. Madison told her that a child had been vomiting and that the mother was not answering calls. She expressed concern about possible neglect. Neglect. There it was again. Jaden's jaw tightened. "And did she tell Stella that the father was listed as the primary contact?" he asked. The principal shook his head. "No." I felt something inside me go still. "She deliberately left that out," I said. "Yes," he admitted. He explained that Stella had believed she was assisting in a potentially serious situation. She had no idea that Jaden's number was listed first. She had no idea that he hadn't even been contacted yet. "She was horrified when she learned the full context," the principal said. "She thought she was helping." I believe that. Naomi had described Stella as silent, but not unkind, just watching. But that didn't erase the hour Naomi had spent feeling observed instead of comforted. "And CPS?" I asked. The principal looked uncomfortable. Madison did not call CPS. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding my breath until I exhaled. "She contacted the district social worker," he clarified. "She reported that a child had been ill for over an hour and the mother was unreachable." "And the social worker?" Jaden asked. "She reviewed the file," the principal said, saw that the father was listed first, asked why he hadn't been called. Madison responded that she preferred to try the mother first. Preferred. Not required. Preferred. "The social worker instructed her to call the father immediately," the principal continued. "She documented the exchange and closed the inquiry because a reachable parent was available." I stared at him. "So when she told me she called CPS?" "She misrepresented the situation," he said carefully. "She lied," I corrected. He didn't argue. Silence filled the office. Then I asked the question that had been burning since Wednesday. "Why?" The principal hesitated. "I spoke with Madison at length," he said. Her explanation was not satisfactory. "That's not an answer," Jaden said quietly. The principal looked at us directly. "She stated that young children should be cared for by their mothers when sick. She expressed concern that a mother working in a position where she is unreachable during school hours was problematic." I felt my pulse in my throat. "So she decided to override the emergency contact order based on her personal beliefs?" I asked. "Yes." "Has she done this before?" Another pause. "There have been previous complaints," he admitted. Fathers who felt dismissed. Working mothers who felt judged. My stomach tightened. "And she was still allowed to handle emergency situations?" Jaden asked. The previous complaints were informal, he said, verbal. Without documentation, it's difficult to pursue disciplinary action beyond a conversation. I understood what he was saying. No paper trail, no consequence. Until now. My email created documentation, I said. Yes, he replied. Clear evidence of policy violation and dishonesty. And what happens next? Jaden asked. The principal folded his hands. Madison has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The district is reviewing the matter. Based on the evidence, termination is likely, but we must follow union procedures. Administrative leave. It wasn't satisfaction, but it was accountability. What about Naomi's file? I asked. There will be no record of any social services concern, he assured us. The inquiry was closed immediately. Nothing will follow her. Relief washed through me in a way that almost hurt. And if she gets sick again? Jaden pressed. I have personally updated her file with a mandatory flag, the principal said. Staff must call you first under all circumstances. Additionally, I have sent a memo to all front office staff clarifying emergency contact procedures. I nodded slowly. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. But as we stood to leave, something in me remained unsettled. In the car, Jaden stared at the steering wheel. Well, he said after a moment, she's being dealt with. Eventually, I replied. But she's been doing this for years, he said. It took you threatening legal involvement for anyone to take it seriously. He wasn't wrong. If I hadn't taken screenshots, if I hadn't saved call logs, if I had simply felt ashamed and let it go, Madison would still be sitting at that desk, still deciding which mothers were acceptable, still delaying calls to fathers, still using the word neglect like a moral weapon. That realization shifted the story from personal to systemic. It wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about how easily quiet bias becomes procedure when no one challenges it. The superintendent emailed us later that week requesting a separate meeting. That was when I realized the escalation wasn't over. This wasn't just an HR correction. It was an investigation. And once investigations start, they rarely stay small. The second meeting was scheduled for the following week. When the superintendent asked to be present, my stomach dropped. It meant this was bigger than one employee's personal preference. It meant they'd found something. We walked into the principal's office again, but this time the atmosphere was heavier. The superintendent introduced himself formally, shook our hands, and thanked us for coming. He didn't waste time. The investigation into Madison's conduct has been completed, he said, and I want to update you personally. I held my breath. She has been terminated. The word hung in the air. Terminated. Not reassigned, not reprimanded, gone. She attempted to contest the decision through her union, he continued. However, the documentation was clear. She violated emergency contact protocol, misrepresented a situation to the district social worker, and made false statements to a parent regarding CPS involvement. False statements. Hearing it said aloud did something strange to my chest. Not relief exactly, not triumph. Validation. Jaden nodded slowly, but his expression wasn't victorious. It was tired. What else did you find? He asked. The superintendent hesitated. During the review process, we interviewed additional parents and staff. And that was when the floor shifted again. There was a father whose son broke his arm on the playground, he said. Madison insisted on calling the mother first, even though the mother was in surgery and unreachable. The father was physically on campus in the pickup line. My hand tightened around Jaden's. She delayed medical response by 40 minutes, the superintendent added quietly. 40 minutes, because she preferred a mother. There was another working mother with similar phone restrictions, he continued. Madison called her 17 times over a minor nosebleed, leaving messages implying neglect. 17 times. The pattern was undeniable now. And there were multiple complaints from fathers who were primary caregivers, the superintendent said. Each reported feeling dismissed or overridden. My mind flashed back to the PTA meeting. The whispers. The looks. This hadn't been imagination. This had been repetition. The superintendent folded his hands. Your documentation was the first formal complaint with sufficient evidence to take action. The first. That sentence landed harder than anything else. For years, other parents had felt something was wrong, but they hadn't documented. They hadn't escalated. They'd swallowed the discomfort and gone home. And Madison had stayed. We left the meeting in silence. The parking lot felt too bright. Jaden leaned against the car and exhaled deeply. She's gone, he said. Yes, but the victory felt complicated. She did this to so many families, he murmured. How many kids sat in that office feeling like something was wrong with their parents? That thought hit me in a place I didn't want to examine. How many children absorbed the message that their fathers weren't enough? How many mothers went home feeling ashamed because they worked? The weight of it settled heavily on my shoulders. That night, after Naomi went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt drained. Because even though Madison was gone, the damage couldn't be undone. Naomi still remembered the staring lady. Jaden still heard, "Make sure Mom answers next time," echoing in his head. And I still remembered the panic of believing CPS might show up at my door. I rested my forehead against my folded arms. For a moment, I let myself feel it fully. The vulnerability, the humiliation, the fear that someone with authority could rewrite my identity with a single accusation. No matter how rational I was, no matter how many documents I had, that first night I had questioned myself. Was I unreachable? Was I failing her? That was the darkest part. Not the lie, not even the investigation, but the way doubt had slipped into my chest. It scared me how easily it had happened. Jaden came into the kitchen quietly and stood behind me. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't checked my phone records," I admitted. He was quiet. "If you hadn't sent that email," I continued, "if I'd just apologized or promised to answer next time, she would still be there," he said. Yes. And that was the breaking point. Because I realized something deeply uncomfortable. The system hadn't protected us. We had protected ourselves. If I hadn't documented, if I hadn't escalated, if I'd let shame silence me, Madison would still be deciding which mothers were worthy. That realization was heavy. It meant responsibility. It meant that sometimes justice depends on someone refusing to accept discomfort as normal. I felt small in that moment. Small against institutions. Small against assumptions that run deeper than policy. And yet not powerless. Because I had proof, and proof had forced change. Still, that night, the emotional crash hit. The adrenaline that had carried me through documentation and meetings finally faded. In its place was exhaustion. I cried quietly at the kitchen table. Not loud sobbing, just silent tears. For the hour Naomi had sat watched. For the nights Jaden had swallowed his pride at PTA meetings. For the version of myself that had doubted her own worth because someone else believed she knew better. Jaden didn't try to fix it. He just sat beside me. And sometimes that's what strength looks like. Not rage, not confrontation, but surviving the moment where doubt almost wins. The next morning, Naomi asked for pancakes before school. We made them. Life didn't pause for emotional processing, but something inside me had shifted. I had seen how easily bias hides behind procedure, and I had seen what happens when someone finally shines light on it. The dark moment wasn't Madison's termination. It was realizing how close I had come to believing her. And that is far more dangerous than any formal complaint. The real turning point didn't come with the word terminated. It came a week later, in an email that was almost too brief. The superintendent wrote to inform us that the district would be implementing new accountability measures across all schools. Anytime an emergency contact order was not followed in exact sequence, the staff member would be required to document the reason in writing and submit it to the principal within 24 hours. Documentation, accountability, oversight. The very tools Madison had ignored were now being reinforced district-wide. That was when I understood something fully for the first time. This wasn't just about Naomi. It was about precedent. I sat at my kitchen counter reading that email while Naomi colored at the table beside me. She hummed quietly to herself, completely detached from the institutional ripple effect her stomach bug had triggered. I looked at her small hands gripping the crayon. 1 hour in that office had changed policy across multiple schools because we refused to stay quiet. Later that afternoon, the principal called personally. "I wanted you to hear this directly," he said. "We are also scheduling staff training regarding implicit bias and family structure diversity." Implicit bias. There it was, finally named. Not misunderstanding. Not preference. Bias. He continued, "We recognize that families don't all operate under traditional models. We failed to account for that properly." For the first time since this started, I felt something close to peace. Because the truth had been acknowledged. Not minimized. Not softened. Acknowledged. That evening, Jaden and I sat on the porch after Naomi went to bed. The air was cool, quiet. "Do you regret pushing this?" he asked. I thought about it. The stress. The sleepless nights. The meetings. "No," I said finally. "Even knowing how draining it's been?" "Yes," I replied. "Because if I hadn't, someone else's kid would still be sitting in that office next month." He nodded slowly. And that was the moment I felt the shift inside me solidify. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was standing in clarity. Madison's belief that mothers must be physically available at all times wasn't personal. It was ideological, and ideologies don't change without resistance. A few days later, Naomi came home from school smiling. "The new lady at the desk knows Dad's name," she said proudly. "What do you mean?" I asked. She said, "Hi, Naomi. Tell your dad we called him about the field trip." I felt warmth spread through my chest. It sounded small, but it wasn't. Her father's role had been recognized, without question, without hierarchy, just normal. That night, I logged into the school portal one more time and reviewed Naomi's emergency contacts. There was now a visible flag attached to her file. Primary contact, Jaden Morgan, call first. Clear, unambiguous. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. It wasn't about ego. It was about respect. Respect for our choices. Respect for our arrangement. Respect for the fact that families build themselves in ways that work, not in ways that fit someone else's nostalgia. For weeks, I had felt defensive, like I needed to prove I was a good mother. But now, something deeper had shifted. I didn't need to prove anything. The facts had done that. And more importantly, I stopped internalizing the accusation. I stopped replaying the word neglect. I stopped wondering whether I should have found a different job. Instead, I started seeing the bigger truth. Madison had never questioned my competence as a parent because of evidence. She questioned it because of assumption, and assumptions crumble under documentation. The final confirmation came when the superintendent sent a formal written apology. It was signed, stamped, on district letterhead. He acknowledged that the school failed to follow established protocol. He acknowledged that misleading statements were made. He acknowledged that bias had influenced decision-making. I read it twice. Then I printed it and placed it in a folder, not out of fear, but as a reminder. A reminder that when something feels wrong, it probably is. A reminder that silence protects systems more than it protects families. That night, lying in bed, I turned to Jaden. "You know what the scariest part was?" I asked. "What?" How close I came to believing her. He was quiet for a moment. "That's how authority works," he said softly. "It makes you question yourself." I nodded. But not anymore. That was the turning point, not the termination, not the policy change. The turning point was internal. I stopped doubting myself. I stopped shrinking under someone else's narrow definition of motherhood. And in that shift, I realized something else. This wasn't the only time in my life I had stayed silent to keep the peace. And maybe, just maybe, that pattern was about to break too. Madison's name didn't disappear overnight. In small towns, names linger. Whispers travel faster than policy updates. A week after her termination, another mother approached Jaden at pickup. "I heard you were the ones who reported her," she said quietly. Jaden didn't confirm. He didn't deny. He just said, "We documented what happened." The woman nodded. "She told me once that I should consider cutting back my hours," she admitted. "Said my son needed a mother who wasn't exhausted." Jaden came home and told me, and something inside me settled in a strange way. This wasn't isolated. This was systemic. And once the truth surfaced, other people felt safe enough to speak. Over the next month, more stories filtered back through parents in passing conversations. A father who'd been made to feel like a substitute instead of a parent. A working mother who'd been lectured about priorities. A family who'd quietly switched schools because the atmosphere felt hostile. Madison hadn't just mismanaged one emergency. She'd shaped an environment. And once that environment cracked, the fallout was inevitable. The superintendent followed through on everything he promised. There were district-wide memos, training sessions, updated emergency contact protocols. Naomi's teacher even sent a personal message assuring us that staff had been reminded of proper procedures. Accountability moved quietly but firmly. Meanwhile, Madison attempted to apply at a neighboring district. We didn't find out officially. We heard it through a parent whose cousin sat on the hiring committee. The new district requested a reference. The principal told the truth. Madison didn't get the job. When I heard that, I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure. Because if someone is entrusted with children, they cannot operate on bias. That's not personal. That's responsibility. The true fallout, though, wasn't professional. It was personal. Jaden admitted one evening that he still felt something raw about the way Madison spoke to him. "She told me to make sure you answered next time," he said quietly. Like I wasn't enough. I reached across the couch and took his hand. "You are more than enough," I said. He looked at Naomi playing on the floor. "I know," he replied, "but it stays with you." And that was the ripple effect. Not just fear, not just anger, but erosion. Erosion of confidence. Erosion of trust. We decided to keep Naomi at the school, not because we were naive, but because the system had corrected itself. The substitute secretary quickly became permanent. She learned our names within a week. She called Jaden twice during the spring semester, once for a mild headache, once for a lice outbreak notice. Both times she apologized for interrupting. Both times she followed protocol exactly. No commentary, no preference, just procedure. The simplicity of that felt revolutionary. The principal sent a follow-up email in March, confirming that since the policy changes, there had been 0 complaints regarding emergency contact procedures. 0. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Naomi finished the school year without incident. She forgot about the staring lady. She remembered field day. She remembered her art project winning a ribbon. The trauma didn't root itself in her, and that mattered more than anything else. For us, the anger slowly turned into something steadier. Not bitterness, not vengeance. Perspective. Because here's what I realized during the fallout. We didn't set out to get someone fired. We set out to protect our daughter. Madison's termination wasn't revenge. It was consequence. Her behavior met documentation. Documentation met policy. Policy met accountability. That's how it should work. One afternoon in April, another parent mentioned that Madison had been treated unfairly and that she meant well. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply said, intent doesn't override protocol, and left it at that, because that was the truth. The school regained stability. The district regained clarity. And our family regained something even more important. Trust in ourselves. Trust that when something feels wrong, it deserves attention. Trust that quiet strength can be more powerful than loud outrage. Madison faded into the background of town conversation, but the changes remained. And that's the part that mattered. Naomi is 8 now. She doesn't remember the phone calls. She doesn't remember the investigation. She remembers being sick and her dad picking her up. That's the version of the story that lives in her mind, and I'm grateful for that. Jaden still works nights. I still work at the plant. My phone still stays locked in my locker for 12 hours at a time. The emergency contact form hasn't changed. The difference is this. Now it's respected. I've thought about that Wednesday more times than I can count. I've thought about how close I came to apologizing for something that wasn't wrong. How quickly doubt creeps in when someone with authority questions your identity. How easily bias hides behind concern. And here's what I've learned. Being a good mother doesn't mean being physically present every minute. It means building a life that supports your child, even when that life doesn't look traditional. It means trusting your partnership. It means standing up when something threatens your family's dignity. Madison believed she was protecting children, but protection without fairness becomes control, and control without accountability becomes harm. I didn't win anything. I didn't celebrate. I documented. I escalated. I stayed calm, and that was enough. Sometimes strength isn't loud. It's methodical. Sometimes courage isn't dramatic. It's an email sent at 4:47 p.m. with screenshots attached. If I hadn't done that, Madison would still be sitting at that desk. Other fathers would still feel dismissed. Other mothers would still question themselves. Instead, the system adjusted, and my daughter grew up watching her parents protect her, not just from playground injuries, but from quiet injustice. That's the real ending. Not revenge, not drama. Just a family that refused to shrink. And sometimes that's the most powerful story of all.